Welcome back to first year undergraduate microeconomics. So far we've been looking at the perfectly competitive market model. And we've looked at that in a lot of detail, we've made a lot of predictions using that model. And that model was based on a number of assumptions. Just to remind you, the first assumption was that there was a single well-defined homogeneous product. So a product like apples or a product like pizza. So even though we know they differ in the real world, we took away that differentiation to simplify the real world into our model. We assumed that all buyers acted as price takers. They took the price as given and decided how much they would like to buy. That gave us their demand curve. We assumed that all sellers acted as price takers as well. Given the price, we asked how much they wished to sell, and that gave us the supply curve. We had our dynamic assumption that if there is a surplus, then the price falls, and if there is excess demand, the price rises. That leads to our equilibrium, which is our prediction of the market outcome. We made the convenient assumption that demand slopes down and supply slopes up. And that's equivalent to assuming decreasing marginal value and increasing marginal cost. And finally, we made another assumption of one price. Remember, we started with the assumption that buyers and sellers both receive the same price. The money that buyers pay goes to sellers. Well, remember also, we got rid of that assumption a long time ago when we started looking at taxes, where we said that the price buyers pay is different to the price sellers receive. So that last assumption has gone a long time ago. We're now going to consider a very different model of the market. In this second model, we're going to have only one seller. And that seller isn't going to be a price taker. That seller is going to set the market price, and its aim will be to maximise its profits. Now, we call a single seller that seeks to set the price to maximise its profits a monopoly. So this is called the monopoly model of market behaviour. Now, what are the assumptions that lie behind this new model? Well, we're going to keep our first two assumptions from the perfectly competitive market model. So we're going to assume there is only one single, well-defined, homogeneous product that the monopolist sells. And we're still going to assume that buyers act like price takers, so that we still have a demand curve. However, we're now not going to have price-taking sellers. Notice immediately that means that we cannot draw a supply curve. The supply curve assumes price-taking behaviour. A monopolist does not have a supply curve. Instead, we're going to have the monopolist setting the price to maximise its profits, given the costs that the monopolist faces. In terms of our dynamic assumption, well, we don't need those either. Previously, we needed those assumptions to work out what the price that actually arose in the market would be. We needed those assumptions to work out where the price would settle. Well, we don't need them anymore because the monopoly, the single seller, will be setting the price. So we certainly don't need our dynamic assumption anymore. We're still going to assume demand slopes down, but as I said, we're not going to have a supply curve, so we certainly don't need to assume that slopes up. However, we are going to assume that marginal cost slopes up, or at least marginal cost doesn't slope down in what we do here. Again, that's a simplifying assumption, but it doesn't really matter. Finally, we're going to use again, to start off with, the assumption of one price. So the price that buyers pay will be the price the monopoly seller receives, and we're actually going to take it a little bit further. We're going to assume the monopolist can only set one price. That assumption is called the no price discrimination assumption. So the monopoly has to set a single, uniform price to all buyers. In the next couple of presentations, we're then going to look at what happens when we get rid of that assumption and allow price discrimination. So, our new assumptions that we're going to have for the monopoly model are going to be that there is a single homogeneous product, all buyers act as price takers, but the new one, the third one, is that there is a single seller who sets the market price to maximise its profits. That's going to be our monopoly seller. Finally, we've got our starting assumption, our no price discrimination assumption, which is that the monopoly only sets one price for all buyers. Final thing to talk about before we finish this presentation is, where would you use these assumptions? What sort of industries look like monopolies? Well, there's situations where you only have one seller or one highly dominant seller. So for example, in most cities around the world, there is one company that provides the water to the city. Often it's actually government owned, but in some cases it's private. And there aren't many good substitutes for water, at least not on a day-to-day basis, so that company is probably a water monopoly. Similarly, in some cities, there will be a single company that provides electricity to the city. And that single company can often be thought of as an electricity monopoly. But sometimes it's not quite clear. There may only be a single gas company as well. And gas and electricity may be substitutes. So if they're strong substitutes, we shouldn't use the monopoly model. We should use a model we're going to talk about a little later on, an oligopoly model. But if you think, well, most of the time when I want to turn on the lights or run my refrigerator, I don't have a choice, I use electricity, and there's only one seller of electricity, the monopoly model's pretty good. So they're often the sort of industries that we're talking about, these big utility industries. So, next presentation we're going to start analysing the monopoly model. Thanks for listening.